The next speaker that we're introducing is from the Sudanese Solidarity Collective. Yeah. So you're gonna come up.
People free the land.
Free the people, free the land.
From Turtle Island to Sudan.
Turtle Island to Sudan.
Free the people, free the land.
Free the people, free the land.
From Turtle Island to Sudan.
From Turtle Island to Sudan.
Woo!
Thank you so much for having us here. I'm so honored to be a representative of the Sudan Solidarity Collective, and I want to share some words with y'all. When one unmarked grave after another of indigenous children who were systemically murdered in residential schools all around this land kept popping up, no truth or reconciliation project could ever historicize these atrocities. Despite attempts to incorporate or co-opt all the actions that have led to this day, the Canadian state and its institutions cannot airbrush the deplorable realities for Indigenous children and people across Turtle Island. The last residential school was closed in 1996. The 60s scoop stole hundreds of thousands of Indigenous children, separating them from their communities, teachings, languages, and cultures into foster care systems. Today, this has evolved, kidnapped by this state under the pretense of care through the Children Aid Society. Indigenous girls are going missing and murdered to this day. The suicide crisis in places like Attawapiskat,
well, the cops are on the way. Anyways.
The cops are in the way. Again.
More evidence of it, you schmucks! Get your dumb cop asses out of the way!
Okay, good.
free the people, free the land. From Turtle Island. Police are still murdering Indigenous children and people all across this country. Indigenous youth are incarcerated disproportionately or living on the street on their land and face increasingly tormenting forms of surveillance, policing, and brutality for their mere existence. We can draw the connecting colonial histories and systemic violence to those of black people on this land. From being human trafficked en masse, unable to return to their ancestral geographies, enslaved, stripped of their language, their cultures, and their humanity, made property of the state through the transatlantic slave trade and its afterlife, or being forcibly displaced in multiple waves as migrants and refugees fleeing war, terror, and genocide on colonized lands, and all the similar ways that we experience systemic and cultural anti-black racist violence in this state. And yet black and Indigenous solidarity and resistance persists. Indigenous youth are organizing and making meaningful connections across struggles on this land. They are practicing life-affirming forms of solidarity. It was the Indigenous youth roots that gave us a physical space to gather our grieving Sudanese community, particularly youth, to process how to respond to the ongoing war in Sudan. In December 2018, Sudanese youth led the courageous efforts to orchestrate an entire revolution that refused the military rule in Sudan and successfully deposed the 30-year Islamist dictatorship of Omar Bashir. They radically organized themselves to collapse a tyrannical government through protests, sit-ins, and general strikes. In 2023, when the current war in Sudan broke out as a counter-revolutionary response to their principled and relentless organizing between two military factions vying for control over the Sudanese state, Sudanese civilians became the prime targets and casualties of this war. However, it was also youth who also continued the revolutionary resistance, being on the front lines of relief efforts and organized resistance in Sudan, taking charge of evacuating their entire families from active war zones to other parts of the country, and facilitating mutual aid networks to fundraise in the diaspora to feed, shelter, and sustain their multiply displaced families in Sudan and around the African continent, in the absence of an international aid community and in the absence of a civilian state. Sudan has been weeping, aching, and shouting since this counter-revolutionary war broke out, which still hasn't stopped, which is still being erased from mainstream media and international politics, which is being propagandized as a civil war. Our grief is palpable, it is exhausting, it is devastating our lives. It is killing our most vulnerable from heartbreak. Children are literally starving to death. 25.6 million children, people, youth, pregnant and nursing women, sick and elderly disabled people are currently in acute hunger. These numbers are expected to worsen. People's homes are being looted by the warring factions. Neighborhoods, cities, villages are being airstriked or burned down to rubble. Over 10.4 million people, including more than 4.6 children, are being displaced. Natural disasters such as scorching heat waves and heavy flooding have continued to compound the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, damage infrastructure, and affect access to humanitarian assistance and evacuations while heightening the spread of diseases. If people are not dying from the bullet of a gun, they are dying from climate disaster. They are dying from hunger or diseases such as cholera, measles, dengue fever, tuberculosis, malaria, and mycetoma. The lack of essential social services like water, sanitation, and hygiene has intensified these health emergencies and disease outbreaks. Women and girls are under attack. Sexual violence, sexual slavery, and forced marriages are rampant. In one campaign in Sudan alone, there have been a documentation of 377 cases of rape since the onset of this war, including 131 cases involving young girls. 19 million school-age children cannot continue their education in Sudan. Entire generations whose lives have been turned upside down, whose futures have been foreclosed. The death toll could be close to being an estimated well over 150,000 people and will worsen the more people keep ignoring what is happening in Sudan. Aid is being politicized, hindered from reaching the most hardest-stricken areas of this war. No ceasefire has been called. No substantive interventions from the international community have been made. No mass consciousness is being mobilized on our behalf to pressure international communities and local governments to provide a meaningful humanitarian response. To open safe and accessible humanitarian corridors for people to evacuate, for food and medicine to get into the country, to stop the production and dissemination of military arms used to kill innocent civilians in this war, to hold all the states and elite parties that are extracting, looting, and selling Sudan's rich natural resources and land while committing cultural, physical genocides of Sudanese people's knowledge, cultural history, are being accountable for their wicked atrocities. Instead, border regimes are tightening up. Anti-Black immigrant policies and sentiments are barring Sudanese immigrants from finding safety in countries all across the world. Sudanese people are being scapegoated for problems in these countries that precede their arrival. Sudanese people are experiencing inhumane extortion rates for fleeing their homeland after being multiply displaced. They are dying on their evacuation routes. They're literally walking back to war zones after being made homeless and stateless and are unable to sustain their lives and survival in these neighboring countries. The main call to action I have today, to bring to you today, is that Sudan is not a footnote, a sound bite, a hashtag, or a token for superficial solidarity. We cannot collectively mobilize our demands for liberation, justice, and accountability to draw the complicities of external states and corporations if the atrocities in Sudan are not being taken seriously or worthy enough for mass solidarity, mass consciousness, and mass organizing here and across the world. Our struggles cannot surface for a headline or intermittently online, then be forgotten and erased over and over again. Sudan, like Haiti, like the DRC, like Tigray, are substantively missing in anti-imperialist movements as a foundation. Do not forget us. What we have to offer in terms of strategies of resistance, methods of rebellion, and histories of uprisings is also why we are in the extreme predicaments we are in. We are being collectively punished for having and acting on our revolutionary imaginaries and organizing for longer liberation struggles. In a better world, our children would not have to be advocates or activists. They should just be children. They shouldn't know how war or genocide feels and sounds like, what it does to the mind, the heart, the body, and the soul. If they survive, they shouldn't have to be riddled with mental health struggles for the rest of their lives. They shouldn't have to chart what professions they have to aim towards to be the humanitarian and just response to save their communities from the grips of empire. Children need to have their lives to live in order to be children. If that doesn't strike empathy in our collective consciousness, I don't know what will. If children do not have a future, what do we have? What are we willing to do to ensure that this is not there in our realities? Just like the way our ancestors did for us. And which children do we care for enough about to create this better world we yearn for? Free the people, free the land.
Free the people, free the land.
From Turtle Island to Sudan. Free the people, free the land. From Turtle Island to Sudan. Thank you.